Hello. So, GDPR. You've got 30 seconds to leave the room before we lock the doors. Some of you in here will be experts on GDPR. Some of you won't even know what it stands for. I will try and cater for you all. There is no who am I, because I don't have that kind of size ego like some other speakers like Thornton Trump might have. But basically I do GDPR and security and data stuff. So, any questions? No, so seriously, the format of this is slightly different to what you have today. There will be no questions at the end for two reasons. One, it's a bit dull doing that. And two, it's lunch, so everyone will want to leave. So please, 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 if you've got questions, heckles, anything, do it in the talk, okay? Just say, shout out, whatever, just heckle. Please do that, because you will all learn more from each other than from anyone else. And if you are brave enough to do that, then we have sweets or money vouchers for drinks tonight. So, yeah, please interact, everybody. So, GDPR. So GDPR stands for General Data Protection Regulation. It's about data protection. Again, you probably already think it's a bit dull. Basically, it's an EU thing. So the European Union has been over the last sort of 20 or 30 years trying to get data protection law out there. And there's a lot of people in European Parliament and commissions and committees, and you sort of look like that and stand there like me and tell you that privacy is the way forward. And in Britain, we're a bit different because we don't really care. So what's happened over the years, in the 80s, we had the idea of a data protection directive. So the EU have directives. And what a directive is this idea that I'm going to tell you what to do, pretty much, go and implement it your own way. So a country goes, thanks very much, I'll create my own law. So in the UK, we had the Data Protection Act. And that's our interpretation of what the EU want. Now, all 28 EU member states have got their own interpretation, which is nice, but means differences in... So if I try and create a company in the UK, I've got to worry about different laws in each different country in the EU. It's a bit of a problem. So that we have this idea of a regulation. You know, really, you've got to do this. And what that is, when the EU decide on a regulation, it instantly becomes law, like that, in every country in the EU. And so what that meant was, back in May last year, every country in the EU, all 28, instantly the GDPR applied to. So GDPR is now law.
Wasn't there exception clauses for each country, and the countries could specify what parts they wanted to be exempt?
Yes, it's a really great question. So the EU, GDPR says this is what you have to do, this is the law. But there is scope for what's called derogations. And derogations basically just mean exceptions. And the idea is that certain parts of the law, there's seats all around if you want to jump in. The idea is that certain bits are so in-country specific. I'll give you an example. In Denmark, there's no ability for the Danish regulator to fine companies. You can't do it. So they have to actually criminally make you liable. So that's one of the derogations. And another one is, what is the age of consent for children for data protection? In the UK, the default is 16, but it could be 13. So those are kind of things, and there's kind of variations. Now, where we kind of are is that this GDPR kicked in 2 years ago. And what's really happened since then is everyone's been dancing around about GDPR, saying it's really bad, really exciting. Guys, there's plenty of seats. Just please, everyone, can you just move in a bit, because it's such an amazing talk that people will keep coming. Don't hate the game, or whatever.
It's where the money is.
Yes, I will come to that. Yeah, the seats coming in. Everyone, it's nice and cool in here. If I say GDPR to different people, especially in this kind of geek hacker community we're in, people think different things. So if I talk to a business person, you might think scary. You might think, oh god, data breaches. Everyone thinks a different kind of thing with GDPR. So first thing is, the instant response, especially from the vendors, is it's all about the breaches. You know, get a stock photo, you're all going to get breached. That's what a breach can look like, apparently. But then there's other people say it's all about fines, and you get this kind of, it's all about the money. Everyone's going to get fined $1 billion. Now, my reaction is slightly different to that. So I have a very much kind of view of, bullshit. And in case any of you missed it, there is actually an 18 plus rating on this talk. You're in, you're stuck. So basically, this talk is really about the bullshit that's going on inside GDPR and what's bullshit and what's not. And hopefully I'll help clarify that, especially with your questions. Yeah, sweet some money, get me later. So what is GDPR really all about? Well, it's really about rights. Now, not these rights, Ian Wright, Matthew Wright, Mark Wright, or the Wright brothers, who you may know. But it's actually about rights for us. Everyone in this room is in the scope of GDPR. We're all protected by GDPR. And what that means is that GDPR is really about you. It's about me. It's about all of us. It's not about companies. PCI, ISO, they're actually about securing and locking down companies and fining companies. GDPR is about giving you all rights. So quite different, really. And people get that a bit mixed up. So some of the rights that are out there that we all have is this one. Anyone know what this one is? Erasure. So it's a beautiful thing. Erasure, also known as the right to be forgotten. Now, this came up several years ago when somebody in Spain said to Google, I want to be forgotten, basically, from Google search results. And they said, no chance. And the EU said, yes, make it happen. And it did. And this kind of concept essentially is now inside European law, which means it's now part of our law. And it says, if a company holds data on you, you have the right in principle to say, delete it. If you used to be a British Gas customer, and you're not anymore, you could say to them, you don't need my data anymore. Get rid of it. That is the right to erasure, essentially. Now, it's a really cool concept, but if you think about, let's say, where you work, and many of you will work in IT and have been thinking about all the things. If I said to you, I used to work for your company, or I used to be a customer, please delete every trace of me. Just think about that, when your IT manager says to you, go and do it, what would you do? You know, it's a pretty big search. Where is even that data? But the other question is, think about backups. How would you remove a record from a backup? It's basically not possible, especially when it's in tape. So, and I have customers that have still got things like microfiche and microfilm. And it's stuff that's physical stuff. So the question is, what do you do with all that? And there's a real big problem at the moment in... not welcome anyway, inside GDPR, because people are saying, the law is saying I have to remove the data, I physically can't, what do I do? And one of the theories out there is that if someone gives you a request to say, remove my data, is you write it down on a piece of paper, and if anyone ever restores that backup onto server, you have to go back and look for that little record and go and proactively delete it. That's never going to happen. We all might do that writing down, but it won't ever happen. And so there's other backup vendors that are saying, actually, maybe we should do backups better and not use tape. So erasure is a really interesting area where people have got problems. Now, another right is the right to portability. And portability is a really cool right. So portability means that if your data is with one company, let's say a bank or Spotify, and in the context of Spotify, think about your playlist history or your playlists. That's data about you. It's your data. It's not really Spotify's in the context of European law. And what the right to portability means is that when you... let's think about competition for a second. Why'd you stay with Spotify? Well, I really like it, but also moving to Google Music would be a pain in the arse because of... I'd have to redo it all. The right to portability means that Spotify, from May next year, have to give me an export function, and Google have to give me an import function. That's really cool stuff. And the export and import thing is also, when I ask my data, it has to be in a human readable format that's relevant to me. So it can't just be XML. And it has to be exportable into a format that somebody else can import, so probably XML in that case. So if you think about banking, that's an area where they've been doing this for years. You've now got really fast banking in the UK, like 5 days to do it. So portability is something that people are going to be getting more into. And if you're in a business, you might have to think about how data might be portable. Go for it.
Thinking on this one about moving my data, when you normally sign up for a service and nobody reads the terms and conditions, and I might have signed up to Spotify 3 years ago, 5 years ago, now GDPR is coming in and it says I could maybe move my account from them and my playlists. When GDPR really kicks in another year's time, it's mandatory. Will a lot of providers of services have to get all the user base, us lot, to re-verify a new set of terms and conditions?
So, yeah, there's sort of two questions really going on. So, come May next year, when GDPR kicks in, when it officially applies, everything has to be valid from then. So there's almost no history. So if they signed you, and I'll come to the second bit, when they if they signed you up in a kind of weird kind of way before, without certain rights, you now will have those rights from May next year. However, those new rights will come with contracts, and every contract from May next year will have to be rewritten. So every term and condition you have ever signed will have to be consented to, re-signed from May next year. Essentially, every contract, and I mean every contract in the whole of the EU, will have to be redone for May next year.
So if I've got a Facebook account and a Google Plus account, then they're going to be contacting me to say, here's the new terms and conditions.
Everything will. Everything will. And some of it you've already signed. Like Google have started rolling out some new stuff, and we sort of get used to, sort of get a bit blind to it. So a question?
No, I was just gonna, it's almost in effect that it's retrospectively applied into that contract.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. So from May next year, it's like, it didn't matter what happened before, now you have this right, you have the right to erasure, even though I'm a customer 10 years ago. So for instance, I was a customer of British Gas 10 years ago. From May next year, I could phone them up and say, is there any trace of me? If there is, delete it. Because you've got no right to it.
Is it enough to provide a process assurance to someone that the data that you have will not be used under any circumstance if you've got, a mountain of backup tape that you're really not going to go through?
Well, this is a really good question about how far does erasure go and what can you do and what you should do. And ultimately, the law inside GDPR says you have to do, as a company, the best you can. What's feasible. If it's going to cost you £1 million and you run a corner shop, you'd say, I won't do it, or I can't do it. At best, I will do this. So my advice for everyone is always do as much as you can and advise what you can't and why, and help the people on the ground, the data subject, understand why and what's going on. And most of the time, people don't really... How many of you have really phoned up somewhere and said, erase my data? Or what data have you got on me? Usually, the only people that do are just basically either arseholes or they're just really angry with the company. So...
You like to troll people who spam you in the post?
It's not unqualified right though. If you're a financial institution and you've got...
Yes, this is a great point. So all of these rights are caveated by what's feasible, what you can do, and what other things come into play. It's a great point. So
where does this fit with credit referencing and fraud referencing?
Yeah, so
raising your data, you then have no history of...
it's sort of... Yeah, it loops in, and I can give you more detail about that, because if you're in the credit industry, there's some other cool bad stuff as well. So basically, if you look at a finance organisation, they have like minimums of have to keep everything 7 years. So I can't say I left Notting Building cited last week, now erase my data, because that's a good example where they say, yeah, in 7 years we'll start talking about it. There's certain things you can and can't do. I work with a housing leasing company, and they have to keep everything for 10 years plus their largest lease, which is 20 years. So essentially it's best endeavours, but any other laws that come into play, any other data protection laws, legal laws, credit referencing laws, all these kind of other things, they override GDPR.
I think it's also just important that it's data minimisation.
Yeah.
Aren't thinking about it. Everybody keeps the stuff for ages. Just remove the bits that you don't actually need.
Yeah, this is a cracking point. This about we have this view, and all of us are sort of guilty for it in insecurity of let's create a data lake. So it's this idea of let's collect all the data we can on everything we can, because one day it'll be useful, won't it? And I know a big system integrator that has done this, created this massive data lake, and one day they will find a use for it, and they spent millions on it. And GDPR comes along and goes, you should not collect data in the first place unless you have an identifiable reason why you need it. So in all contexts, when you're collecting data, you shouldn't be asking for 10 different things. And I'll give you a really great example. When you signed up to SteelCon, it asks you certain bits of information, but other cons ask you for more. And you're like, well, why do you need that? You don't actually need it to give me access to the conference. So you should really give me the ability to say no to everything. To basically opt out of giving that information. Or things like, if you come to SteelCon, what is your sexual preference? They've no need for that. Are you a member of a trade union? They've no need for that. So that's the kind of thing where you shouldn't be asking for stuff you don't need. And you shouldn't be collecting data and processing it unless you've got a good reason for it.
That whole concept of kind of minimisation and retention was baked into the Data Protection Act. It's the fact that not every organisation out there adhering to it. It's not
Yeah,
just
this
because of
is a great point. It's that people look at GDPR as like this is kind of the genesis of data protection. In reality, Genesis happened earlier on. We're now in like Leviticus or Deuteronomy. Good, that one, it. But so we're basically a bit further down the line. But essentially, Data Protection Act or Data Protection Directive, when it came out of EU, had loads of great stuff in it. It's just that everyone ignored it, and so everyone's looking at GDPR as this brand new thing. Can I just? Well, yeah, exactly. No one really enforced it much, especially the ICO in the UK, and so people said, "Well, this is accepted behaviour." I'll talk about some examples of that. Thank you. Do you mind if we just scoot on a little bit quicker, and then we'll keep getting through them, because there might be some boring bits where you can ask some questions in a bit. But yeah. So another right is a small one, but essentially, if your data is out there, then you want the right to rectification. So essentially, someone's posted something about you, it's not right, you've got the ability to say to them, like, you've got my address details wrong, or whatever, or a good example is, you change your name for 10 different reasons. We're in a pretty modern society these days, and people's name change, address changes, genders change, whatever. You have the right to say to people, you have this data, amend it, make it right. And they have to do that without undue delay, which basically means as soon as possible. So, I know you're all thinking this is the most exciting thing you'll see today. Essentially, this is the best thing in the world. It's so cool. Well, it's you can argue that, there are worse jobs out there. There are even worse jobs out there. Well boring. But the thing is, you say that and you look at it and go, yeah, I'm not working.
I just got that.
Yeah, spot the foreigner. But you look at it and go, God, this is dull. But then cool people come along and you start to look at it and go, actually, Elon Musk comes along and goes, well, all right, let's start turning boring into something really, really cool. And who wouldn't want to work for that company? So data protection is sort of a bit like that. On the surface, it's like, oh God, why am I even here? Listening to Carl. But then you start to get involved in it and go, well, this is actually quite cool stuff. But more important about that is there's a lot of money in it. And I mean a lot. Whether you're a GDPR consultant or whether you're doing the projects off the back of it, almost every organisation you guys work for has probably got GDPR projects specifically, or projects that have come off the back of it, or someone said, and now I need a pen test for that, or I need assurance for this, or whatever. There's a huge amount there, and whether you think it's dull or not, there's a really good career path and, money. So, first question I always get with Brexit is Brexit. You go, well, surely that comes into play. Well, if you think about Brexit and what's going on, we don't really know what's happening just about, but pretty much it's just quite sort of some certainty that Brexit will happen in March 2019. And so we play out what's going on and we really focus on the dates. And if you think about the dates with Brexit and sort of where we are now, those dates, GDPR kicks in May next year. So we now have European law applying in the UK. So, but then a year later, or sort of 9 months, 10 months later, we leave the EU. Now what's going on is that the UK government and also the Queen, under instruction from the UK government, she's not an expert on this by any means, is they've both said, we're carrying on. So from the key dates in mind, from when we hit Brexit in March 2019 in the UK, we will have a mirror we have the Great Repeal Act, and the Repeal Act says that anything that's in UK law adopted from the EU, we're basically just going to do a find and replace EU with UK. It's sort of that kind of thing. And we've now got our, what we call it, Data Protection Act 2, or UK GDPR, or GDPR Next Gen, or with a bit of machine learning. So, that makes it better, actually. But basically, those are the key dates. So it's happening. It's already in law now because we're part of we embrace EU law. It's applying. That word apply is key. Applies from May next year. Now, we got asked before about trolling, and the two best trolls I know are Darren Martin, you might know him as Infodocs, great guy, and Martin Lewis of Money Saving Expert. And Martin Lewis is one of those people that, like, he doesn't let anyone get away with any fucking shit at all. Like, any company, he's like, he's having you, and he's going to give you 10 ways of being screwed over. And Darren's one of those people that you have a beer with him, and he says, we could fucking do that, couldn't we? We could get him like that. And he's got the best ideas in the world. And one of the cool things that these two, in talking with Darren especially, and Martin is going to do it, is involved in, I talked about data portability before, the idea of, this is called a subject access request. And what that is, you might have heard of the Freedom of Information Act. Essentially, it means that you can ask certain people for what data they've got on you. And it's in part of the Data Protection Act already. But essentially, in the GDPR, that's really formalised and says a data subject, which is me, can submit a subject access request and say, British Gas, give me all the data you have on me. And they have to do that within 30 days, and it doesn't cost anything. They can't charge for it unless I send 10 requests every day and be an arsehole. Unless it's vexatious, it has to be free, and they have to do it in 30 days. That's pretty tough stuff. And so this subject access request thing, you can basically be a subject access request troll and go out there and do that. And for instance, none of us are really going to do it because we're not arses generally, but when you want to be, what a really nice website to be would be a website you could go to, like sargenerator.com. I don't know who owns that. And basically go to that. There's nothing there yet, but you can basically go to it and go, drop down, which company do you want to troll? British Gas. Okay, my name and address, send. And they have to do 30 days, send me all my data. That could be really an arsehole move. But that's the kind of thing you could do. But subject access requests, this ability to just basically go and ask for your data. Now, interestingly, data privacy sort of focused people are really saying, like, if someone asks for your for their data, you should give it to them. My response is, if you phone up Sky and say, give me all my data, well, why are you doing that? It's because maybe you're an arse, but really you just had a bad experience. So my first advice is I'll always actually triage the process. And if you say, what's up? Well, let's say you phone up your doctor and say, give me your data. You don't really want your data. You're just worried about a malpractice suit and you want some evidence, or you want an appointment. So often you don't need to submit the SAR, the subject access request sort of thing. It's about focusing on what the customer really wants. So I'm more of a kind of real world view person of saying, ask them what they really want. And if it is their data, that's fine. But often it isn't. There's a question.
Just going to make a point, sorry.
Oh, is that a statement?
No,
yeah, you don't get anything for statements.
If you think this is bad from customers doing it, employees are worse.
So, yeah, you're absolutely right. So, I've already seen this, internal employees just saying, give me all the data you've got on me. And they said, yeah, look for a job. But yeah, it's... ex-employees is a great one. And this is where it comes into this point about what can you legally do, because there's certain requirements you have to keep data for. And if I say delete all my emails that have got me in them, well, I say, well, no, because there's 2 copies of every email, one that you've got and the one the recipient got. So there's like certain things you can do and can't do in legality. But yeah, it's just trolling on a major scale.
It's a SAR, so it's emails, purchase orders, trading records.
It's a pain. So the next question I always get, and I was speaking to American chap last night, good guy saying, this is a European Union, give a shit. And you get this kind of this kind of response, and so but the truth of the matter is that so let's talk about scope and whether it actually does matter. So the European Union GDPR. Remember, I said it's focused on you, not the companies. So if a company around the world is targeting you for business, for services, or whatever, or has got your data because they're interacting with you, let's say American Airlines, let's say they had no offices outside of the US, but they were still selling in sterling, or still was selling to people in the UK, and were still taking sort of UK transactions, that's a good example of where they are targeting the UK and Europe, and therefore they are in scope. So therefore, any personal data they process relating to EU is fully inside GDPR. And what happens is that if you're outside of the EU but you're in scope, you have to appoint a representative inside the EU, and that representative is your bitch that is going to get screwed by the regulator. So essentially, when the Italian regulator says you've been messing around with the Italian people, they come after the local presence that company's got.
It's a scope question, but from a different perspective.
Yeah.
Probably relates largely to government rather than commercial organisations. What about the boxes? So the stuff that's not necessarily tied into searchable, backup.
Right, great question. So the scope of GDPR is essentially on fileable data. So, and if you think about what that is, so anything on a computer, anything backed up that can be restored onto a computer, anything that could go into a filing cabinet, I like to think of it as anything that if you had a temp, they would like to steal. You know, it's the stuff like, oh, it's my final day, grab those files, run off. So it's essentially not stuff on a whiteboard, it's not stuff in a notepad that's unstructured, and not stuff on post-it notes. Anything else that's fileable is in scope. So it all depends on that.
What about system log files?
It's on a computer, it's searchable, so therefore it's fileable.
So GDPR brings IP addresses very clearly into scope.
Yeah, IP addresses.
If I provide my IP address, if I sign up to Google, provide my IP address, and say, give me all your log files.
An IP address cannot identify the individual.
So, well, this is a great point. So, yeah, great point, everyone. So, in GDPR, GDPR is all about personal data, and they define personal data as anything that can be used. Let's say it can be used to help identify a natural person. And now, a natural person is one of us. A natural person is a European citizen or resident that's not dead. And i.e. people that care about it, because dead people usually don't. So, but the point is, an IP address can, sometimes. So you have to look at the context of it. So let's say if it's one public IP of AOL's global proxy for 1 billion people behind it, irrelevant. If it's the public IP of somebody in a county where there's one house, bang, you know who it is. So that's the kind of concept of it. So a log file, if there's data in there that can help identify people, absolutely in scope. You've got to protect it.
So, how are you meant to authenticate that it's the actual person you're delivering? Because
yeah, it's a really good question. The subject access request process, a key part of it is, okay, thanks for the question, who are you? And so you've got to ask for certain amounts of data. Obviously, you don't ask for too much, because then you're in that kind of, the war again. But the idea is, ask for what you can, and if they were already a customer, you probably already got a methodology there. But it's a good point. It's stuff you have to think about, and how you provide it as well. So this whole fuck this shit, you're not my mother. Well, person who is your mother is Elizabeth Denham, and she is in the UK, she is what's known as the Information Commissioner. So if you hear about people say the ICO, that stands for the Information Commissioner's Office. They're actually talking about her office in Wilmslow. Not a physical one, but all the people in it. But she is the Information Commissioner. Canadian, cool, and she really, really knows her shit. She's she's not a privacy activist, she just gets it. So she's like, well, if you really tried, if you trained all your people on data protection and you still failed because of some super zero-day nation state, whatever, fair play, you did a good job, as opposed to you took the piss, you're getting fined. And that's really the whole sort of premise of where we're going. That's kind of cutting through that crap. So the ICO in the UK is the UK regulator, and there's a single appointed kind of, they call it a one-stop shop, a single regulator, like head regulator in every country, all 28 countries in the EU. And they're the people that enforce, give you advice. Cool thing about them, even though a government department, really, they're really helpful. Just email them or phone them up and say, I'm doing this thing with data, our IP address is in a log file. And they go, yeah, in this context, here's 10 different examples of why it isn't, and here's where we find someone that did this, that, and the other. That's really cool, and not like a government department. So I really like the ICO. Some people hate them, but they're dicks. So, other big bullshit thing is about fines. So you'll hear this thing about 4%. So inside GDPR, 4% of your global turnover of your parent company is the biggest you can be fined. So in the case of Google, that's in the billions. And people are saying everyone's going to get fined 4% of their global revenue. Or if you're a small company, let's say under $500 million revenue, the maximum is 20 million euros, which is a lot of money for a corner shop. So, people can get put out of business and it's going to be really bad. It's not going to happen. This is reality. For a global mega 4% fine is going to be so unlikely. And there's a few reasons for that. One, well, the fines themselves have to be dissuasive. And it's a really cool word. They actually use it inside the law, dissuasive. And the idea is they sort of know, it basically goes a bit further. Like, we want to fine you £10 million, but we want to stop everyone else, so we're going to basically fine you a bit more. Which is sort of cool, but at the same time, if they go too high, then they're putting people out of business and everyone's just going to go, nah, I'm just not going to bother, this is stupid. So they've got to sort of be reasonable. Now, at the moment in the UK, we have a limit of £500,000 under the Data Protection Act. So we're moving from 500k up to 20 million euros or potentially billions, depending on how big you are. Now, what's the other cool thing with fines is all the EU countries meet together in this little board and talk about harmonising. All the rules are harmonised inside the law because it's a regulation. But the cool thing is fines are as well. So day one, Italy might come out and go, right, we're going to fine someone and just prove we've got teeth, fine someone £1 million or €1 million. But then if suddenly Germany go, well, for the same offence, we're going to go 50 million, then we're suddenly out of sync a bit. So they have to keep meeting to keep it kind of ratcheting up. So they're going to have to start off, make a point, but they can't start off too high because there's nowhere to go, and then start levelling out in these kind of levels. But for this thing of from May next year, if you don't, for instance, buy our super duper machine learning algorithm, whatever, then you're going to get fined 4% of your whatever, is just bullshit. So if you hear those kind of numbers, just take it with a fucking crate of salt and say, yeah, there's fines, we have to do stuff. But the bigger point is, it's not about being faster than the bear, if you think of Elizabeth Denham as the bear, and say, it's about being faster than the person next to you. If you're in industry, let's say finance, don't be the worst in finance. Be one of the better ones. You don't need to be the best. Just think the ICO with their little team over in Wilmslow in Cheshire, they're the ones that have got to do this work, regulate, advise, whatever. They're going to go after low-hanging fruit. And if you're the ones making an effort, you're in a good place. Tim?
What happens to the fines?
Fines go to Central Treasury in the UK, which is basically their kind of inflow for them to go and do what they want, like, oh, war, money. Yeah, exactly. Whereas the ICO don't get any of it, unfortunately. Well, not directly, and they've said they don't actually want any direct.
But there's the 4%, which is like the headline fine, but there's also the 2%, and they're defined under there as well. There's like
yeah, this is a good point. So there's actually sort of two levels of fines. You've got this kind of maximum headline fine of 4% or 20 million euros, and those are for offences like rights-focused, really, or a specific focus on data security and incident, whereas there's a lower level of fine. And the lower level of fine is interesting because it's actually for weird concepts like if you ignore generally security, or if you try and get consent from a child, well, won't fine you as much. It's a bit backward in that kind of thinking, but essentially there's two levels of fines, as said. So when people are dancing around with fines, just take it with a pinch of salt and kind of move on. Now, let's talk...
In the public sector?
Yeah, so... The fines technically do apply to everyone, so whether it be public sector, private sector, or charity, which is called the third sector. Now, the problem is that you can't start fining the NHS £10 million because they're going to go, all right, there's £10 million. Can I have £10 million, please, for my budget? It just doesn't make sense. And charities as well, they can't start putting charities out of business. But let's talk about charities, specifically cancer research. They got fined, I think it was 16k a few months ago. And about 9 charities got fined really badly by the ICO. And what happened was they were doing a number of things that were illegal, but accepted practices, apparently, in the UK. Now, one of the things all the charities were doing that got fined were wealth screening. Now, wealth screening is this thing where, essentially, I donate to Cancer Research UK, give them my details. They then get that data set, go to company's house and get the other data set of who's the company director, and then go to, let's say, LinkedIn and go... let's get that data set, merge it together and go, oh, Carl Gottlieb, donor, company director, works in IT, all money, right, and then put me onto the big donor list. I'm now wealthy, apparently, and then I'll start getting targeted for more money in a different kind of way. That's wealth screening. Perfectly legal if you ask for consent, which none of them did, because one, it was an accepted practice, so why would you? And this is legal now inside the Data Protection Act, not even GDPR. But the great line is from all the charities, they said, we would ask for consent, but if we did, no one would give it. Now, can you imagine that in a kind of sexual harassment suit? Like, I would have asked her, but she's going to say no. So, it's, yeah, so the ICO just went, nah.
So now they're being the dicks, so you just flood them with subject access requests.
who am I to say what you do? Yeah, empowering you with the law. So yeah, they got fined for doing stuff like that, and it's quite heartbreaking to see fines for charities. And you think what Great Ormond Street or Cancer Research do, where that money actually goes, especially Great Ormond Street, it's quite visceral. But Google, this is a great example. I just said before about this 4% thing, and no one's going to get fined 4%. Well, outside of data protection law, Google just got fined 3.4% of their global parent turnover for competition law for their, was it WhatsApp acquisition, the way they handled that. And TalkTalk, so it shows they've got teeth, they can do this kind of stuff. And TalkTalk was a good example where they got fined for basically being complete dicks. And what happened with TalkTalk was, yeah, they had bugger all security, they didn't even have a WAF or whatever, and got done by SQL injection by a script kiddie. But that can happen to anyone, really. It's not that bad. But it's the fact that they leaked so much data out and then handled it so badly. And the ICO said, if you get breached, work with us, phone us up, let's have a chat. Don't be an arse about it. So what does a breach look like? Well, that's a beach. Apparently a breach is either about data coming out or people trying to get in. So over here, that's a breach. But essentially, those are two of the worst stock photos I could find on security, by the way, after good Googling. So if we talk about breach and breach handling, what GDPR says is that, and we can talk about some scenarios, is that if you get breached, you have to notify the ICO or data subjects, so basically customers, depending on the impact. So let's play an example out. You've got an encrypted laptop, full disk encryption, you leave it on the train, it's got an Excel spreadsheet on with some children's faces and full details all about their name and address. Should you inform anyone? Well, under the GDPR, no. GDPR says you don't legally have to. You can if you want to. You can tell anyone you want that's relevant, but you don't legally have to, because they would argue that the encryption means that there is no feasible way for that data to be recovered. Essentially, there's no data there. Now, other people might argue, yeah, data is only encrypted for a few years until people come up with a way of decrypting it. But that encryption is an area where there is guidance saying, look, that's a kind of circumstance. And it's all about impact. Can people be hurt by this? If I leave names and emails from, let's say, SteelCon in a bin in Sheffield, could that hurt people? Well, only if people are rummaging through the bin, and arguably is that really sensitive data are going to hurt people. So this is the kind of difficulty that when you have a breach, like the AA did, when they've got now legally 72 hours to notify people. They have to notify the ICO, the regulator, and notify potentially if you're impacted. And so this is sort of problematic because it means you have to very quickly work out what's gone out there. Is it even your data? If you find a spreadsheet on Pastebin with names and addresses, and I say, Scottish Gas, that's your data. Is it? How do you know? How do you know, as a company, if I said to you, here's a spreadsheet of names and email addresses, that's your data, it's been leaked on Pastebin? How would you know? How do you know it's not somebody else's? That's problem one. Let's say you know it is. You've then got to think, what is the impact of if that got out? Has it been maliciously stolen? Or is it one journalist we know has got it and therefore no one else has? If that's the case and it's now been locked down, has it been leaked? Or has the journalist got it from a tip? These are all really difficult things. And then it's a case of what can people do about it? Is that going to hurt people? Is names and addresses going to hurt people, or is that in the phone book? So there's a lot of stuff that goes in, and we can't. What I always urge people to say is, especially techies, is data breach handling is actually really complex. It's really an art, and you must have a process of how you're going to handle it and assess what you do quickly, so you know how to process it. But it's not just a case of something happened, tell the world. We can't have that kind of view of things. And AA was a great example where a lot of people jumped on the view of something's happened, tell the world. And AA sort of did the opposite, of said, well, we don't really know what we're going to do, so we're not going to do anything, and got caught by that. And we'll talk more about the AA in a minute. But TalkTalk was a great example of what not to do. And they basically said, hardly anyone's been affected, nothing bad's really happened, no one's going to get fished. Then every bad thing did happen, and people got fished, and people got hurt by it. They didn't really know how much data got stolen. They had no security. And they tried to evade the ICO. It was a complete mess. And the chief exec, who looks like Harry Potter, got fired. And so And Tesco Bank's another example of where they just messed up a breach handling as well. Now, GDPR says that as a controller, which is me that holds data like as a customer, let's say Scottish Power, they're a controller. You give data to them. They might send all their data to Microsoft Azure for hosting in the background or backups or whatever. Now, they're the processor. A processor is defined as someone that takes direction. So what's cool is that previously, like now, if Azure lost the data, it's like, whatevs. Whereas now, coming in GDPR, whoever's liable, like basically whoever fucked up the most, is going to get fined the most, and it gets apportioned. So that's a really nice thing to bring processors into scope. But just moving on to the AA for a second. So Chris, the photographer chap you'll see floating around, actually quoted it and asked the ICO what their view of it is. Now, if we sort of dissect Chris's tweet a little bit. So, cool, first thing is, he could tweet the ICO and get an answer. How many government departments can you get an authoritative answer on? That's really, really cool, because we've got people on Twitter waiting for this, and they pretty much know their stuff. So the first thing is, sort of the question really is, should the AA have notified people? Now, under current law, unless you're a telco or a bank, let's say like TalkTalk or Tesco Bank, you don't have to legally inform data subjects like you. You don't have to do it. This is why when you look at American press, it looks like there's breaches happening every second, because they're always notifying people, because a lot of them have to. Whereas in the UK, it's just telcos or banks. So AA never had to actually tell you that it went on. Now, they should at certain stages, but they didn't. So the first question is, did they have to tell you? Well, the answer is no, but the question is more really should. And what the ICO came out with was a bit of a kind of woolly answer, but essentially they said the focus really is whatever happens, whether you get breached or not, however you handle the breach, you're still going to keep data safe. Even if you screw up the data, even if you notify people beautifully in breaches, if you still lost the data, you're still screwed up. We're still going to come after you, depending on what happened. In the case of TalkTalk, it was a stupid SQL injection thing. They're worth a fine. If it was a nation-state thing, like potentially Sony, then you can maybe let them off. So, and they're saying, yeah, we're going to investigate it, and they are. But that's a cool example of where the ICO are getting involved again. So, let's talk about some more trolling stuff. So, we talked about whistleblowing. Now, the cool thing about all this is, at the moment, most people working in companies have got no way of whistleblowing. Some really big ones do. They have a whistleblowing email address where you can say, I think bad things are happening, go and look into it. Please don't fire me. I hope this email is anonymous. It probably isn't. Damn, I'm fired. Whereas that now, under GDPR, really, because you know there's some teeth going into it, you can tweet them. You can tweet them and go, I work for a dickhead company. Please go and look into them. They've just stored all the data in a bin somewhere. You might want to have a look. You know, yes, you can be a complete knob and be a troll on it, or you can be a legitimate whistleblower. Now that, again, if you think about it, this is putting power into your hands. You're currently, whether you're a European citizen or not, you are currently here now, which means you're a resident, which means you are all inside scope of GDPR. So we all have this kind of right. So that's another example of where you can be an arse, or you can be sort of quite cool about it, and sort of try and improve things. So I'm going to talk about the eat my shit moment now. And eat my shit moment is the really, really shitty stuff that you all used to. And British institution Royal Mail, let's talk about them. This is a consent form currently, which says, basically, here's some tick boxes if you do not wish us to do it. Here's some more tick boxes again. And they flip the language round. So they actually move from do not wish to do. So you're either going to tick all of them or none of them, and you're still going to get screwed. And that's the kind of shit that's been going on. And it's been technically legal for a while under sort of data protection law in the UK. And so that is changing. And the cool thing is that I mean, you look at that and you go, it's just stupid. There's actually a website called I think it's Dark Patterns that focuses on this, and you can go to Dark Patterns. They've got a Twitter handle where it basically all the weird ways they trick you into buying like extra insurance on flights and stuff and mishandling consent like that. So you know, so my reaction, it really is like it's bullshit, and it's simple. Just ask for it. You know, this is what it should be. It's like, do you want to subscribe? Yes or no? It's cool if you want to subscribe. But what's been going on is people have been trying to trick you into getting your data and thinking somehow that's valuable. But having data on people that don't want to have given you it in the first place is stupid. You end up with these massive databases. I've got customers that go, yeah, I've got a million emails on my list. Does anyone buy from it? No. What's the point then? So people really should be thinking about minimization, which was a great point earlier on, about saying, rather than thinking you've got a million emails of crap in your Excel spreadsheet, how about you get it down to the people that actually want to consent? Like, for instance, I want to consent to Tesco loyalty club because I get money off. I want to do that. That's great. I don't want to consent to the Aldi club because I'm not really bothered. It's cheap enough. So don't force me into stuff I don't want to. And the quality of data is always going to be much higher and better for business if you get consent right. So let's talk about some more really, really big bullshit stuff and big Arnie level bullshit stuff. So let's talk about adequacy, not inadequacy like some of us might feel, but just talk about this thing called adequacy. And adequacy is this view that European unions looked at a country and go, you're adequate from a data protection perspective. Some really dullards that work for them to have to do this. And there's another sort of session going on in summer. And one of the assessments they're doing is of the US. And adequacy means that they trust another country to send data there. So in the moment, we have something called Privacy Shield. Privacy Shield is like the child of something called Safe Harbor, which was an agreement that said, US, don't mess around with data. I trust you, right? And the US went, fuck off. And and NSA were a big part of that. So they had to rewrite it and came up with Privacy Shield. And Privacy Shield is like a kind of, seriously, guys, don't mess around with our data. And inside the EU, we're all okay because we're all deemed as equal. When Brexit happens, people are saying, well, surely we've got Theresa May and we've got this, we won't be deemed adequate or not. Or if Privacy Shield fails because Trump's going to go, no, and break apart all data protection laws in the US, what's going to happen? Surely, if those two agreements fail, the UK and the US can no longer process European data. It's not going to happen. People hate me for saying this, and I'm not apologetic. If the US, if the European Union one day say, US is no longer adequate, don't send them data, are we just stop using US companies? Is it going to happen? It's not going to happen. So I'm unapologetic in saying that's not your problem. It's a problem for European bureaucrats. Apologies. And yes, there's some work to do. Yes, that's fine, but it's going to work out. UK isn't just going to become an island where we can't process European data. It's not going to happen, and therefore, yes, there'll be some more agreements, like Privacy Shield 2 or whatever, but it won't affect any data flows. That you can hold me to that, happily. And the other one is that, okay, how can I fix GDPR? Encryption. Encryption's the answer. So... so I am so that second line. I am so like someone goes, oh, I've got a PGP key. I'm like, what the fuck? And I know what I'm doing with that. Yeah, like, email or DM me. So basically, encryption. What's encryption do? Yeah, encryption anonymizes data or takes it out of the kind of ability to, let's say you get breached, laptop on a train. It doesn't take it out of scope though. Personal data doesn't disappear. It's just encrypted. If I've got a laptop with a full disk encryption and a post-it note underneath with my password on, still in scope of GDPR. So encryption is not a magic answer. It helps massively. If you encrypt all your data, make it really hard to get to the keys or whatever, really well key managed, you could almost argue that instead of deleting data, encrypt it and throw away the key. Whatever, the point is that encryption doesn't take data out of scope. It doesn't absolve you of GDPR. It's still all in scope. The data is still there. It just looks a bit different. It might have some rude words in it. And so the point is, encrypt as much as you can in a kind of nice and safe way. But yeah, you better protect the keys as well. So for me, that's that kind of massive pile of bullshit. And you will see those two things again and again. Encryption, adequacy, the UK's going to fall off a cliff, all this kind of stuff. Yeah, don't worry about it. So what do I want to leave you with, really? And one word. Money. Money. It's one of the biggest motivators we've got, and you can have a really, really fun job that's related to data protection. Please don't shy away from it as this kind of really dry, dull thing that you can't get anything out of. If you are the most aggressive pen tester, red teamer, that hates even the word data, well, the big area where money is coming into that space is saying, I don't care about vulnerabilities, find some data. You know, if at the end of a red team test, so here's what we found, it's like 1,000 vulnerabilities, and it usually goes, I'll put that in my filing cabinet that's shaped like a bin, where really what you say is, we found this spreadsheet, we found this piece of data, and we found this, and this would be a fine under GDPR. That's the stuff that goes, right, okay, that's going to CISO, that's going to chief exec, how do we have a £4 million project to mitigate that? What would you recommend? Is it firewalls? Is it consultancy? What do we need to do? Who do we need to train? Do you know anyone that does training? Can you do training? Can you do some more consultancy? Oh, we need to do another test. And it sounds, I'm sort of a salesman as well, not a great one. And so, but what happens is every time there's an issue that is really relevant to a board level issue, and now GDPR is on every board risk register, if you can tap into that, even if it's just through the route you're currently in, whether it be the most hardcore techie thing or training thing or whatever, if you can tap into that, create a need, then what we're seeing is budgets being created all over the place. So I'm not saying to you, go and be a data protection officer, go and be a consultant like me in data protection or GDPR or whatever. I'm saying, understand it and understand how you can use it to do the stuff you love and make a lot of money. Day rates for data protection consultancy, because there's a massive shortage of them now, are pretty damn good. Come May next year, it's going to be taking the mick. It's going to be great. And all the work that's going to spin out of that is going to be fantastic as well. So wherever you are, you will financially and career level benefit if you've got the right attitude over the next year on it. So have a bit of a read and go make some money. Get some questions.
It was just a comment that kind of build on that. For an internal person rather than an external consultant person, data is going to be far more accessible and tangible to an exec board who provide budgets into organisations than, hey, vulnerabilities, blah, blah, blah. So it's a good way to not just make money, but get money to do things. Exactly.
You know, what does a vulnerability look like? You know, you can't draw one out on a piece of paper, whereas I said there's an Excel spreadsheet. Everyone knows what that looks like and feels like and works on. You say there's an Excel spreadsheet with people's passwords on or data or whatever, or inside leg measurements. That's visceral. We understand what that is. And saying there is a spreadsheet floating around the internet, you know, you're absolutely right. It's really, and that's kind of language that connects with people. So as you're thinking really technical stuff, try and relate it to this current need of data-focused stuff. Any more questions? At the back, sorry, Al.
CCTV can be used to identify a person. Is that in scope?
Yes.
So how do I ask for all of the CCTV footage of me?
Politely. But it's a point. There's actually, the ICO are great. They've actually got guidance on current law and future law about CCTV. And essentially, because that can, if it's used for biometric data, biometric reasons, there's greater levels of security handling around it. So look for guidance on that. But yeah, it is in scope. So I'll just get to you.
In terms of the deletion or modifications, the request cascade to, if say Spotify, outsourced something to, as one of your examples, but say there's bits of that with people that they're then affiliated with.
For the subject access request.
Yeah.
So essentially, this access request is always to the controller because they're the people holding responsible for your data. If they've got a joint controller, which is where they're kind of like half working with somebody else, then they'll have an agreement of who kind of owns that process. When they've got processors behind the scenes, they'll be the proxy to go and ask for the data they need. They won't defer you out to them. All you have to do is speak to the controller essentially once. It's as simple as that.
So an example, say it's Spotify and then they fire and then they contains information about the users as well. If you're at Spotify, please remove my stuff, and then Spotify say, oh well, actually we employ X.
That's their responsibility.
Okay, but then that request then go to all the other.
Yeah, they've got to take that on board. Finally,
if the data's been acquired to be used in a criminal case.
So this comes back to great questions. This comes back to other laws. So where there's other requirements to on top of that data. So let's say criminal. A good example at the moment is PPI claims. Banks are saying, I want to keep it longer in case there's another screw up and have to retrospectively go back and give you some money. So in those circumstances, let's say criminal background checks, or it could be used in a criminal case, they trump GDPR. And so therefore, you'd have to go back to the subject and say, look, we can only do so much.
I think the terms of the regulation are enforcement of contracts somewhere along the lines, and it counts.
Yeah.
There's an enforcement of a contract, for example, you took a loan out with a bank.
Yeah, exactly. There's essentially they'll do as much as they can as they have to. It's lunch almost, so thank you everyone. Thank you for all the questions.